Welcome back to movementprofessional.com. So I wanted to go over a progression of cross-connection type of movements, or movements that we can assess rotation and train rotation with, and try to break them down a little bit and help understand if there is some restriction in mobility, where we might want to start and where we can also maybe gain some motion that we're currently unable to get. So when we think about what a cross connection would be, it would be the idea of bringing an elbow to the opposite knee. So I can do this in any position. In standing, it would just be trying to touch this to this, but there's a lot of different compensations that can happen as we do that, and then there's also just a lot of positions that we just may not be able to make that connection, and we just want to understand why it's important and where we can start with it. So why it's important is, instead of thinking of it as elbow to knee, we can actually think of it as sort of as a symbol of the fact that we're able to bring the rib cage on one side toward the front of the pelvis on the other side. So we're actually able to create rotation more proximally. If we're not able to make this connection, a lot of times that means that the body is being opened up into extension on the backside, and the ribs might flare on the front, pelvis might be a little bit open, so we can't internally rotate with the hip. We can't create this kind of compression down through the rib cage. And that's really important when we want to be able to rotate in any type of athletic movement, but just even with walking. If we're not able to make this cross connection, then that may manifest as the body being open as we walk forward, as opposed to it being reciprocal with motion. And then that's going to leave us with a state where we're chronically tense and tight back here, and it might actually even be harder to breathe out because a nice exhale brings our ribs down. So we just might be in a state where we're actually working harder than we need to all the time. So this could be a nice assessment to say, like, all right, wherever we are, that's where we want to train, but we also want to look where we can get to within a progression. So the first position I want to look at is in sidelying. This is usually the easiest position to make a connection, even if you're quite tight and pulled into the opposite direction. So starting in like a fetal position here, we're going to just rest the head on the arm, on the bottom arm here. And then first I'm actually going to look at a same side connection. So I want to reach the top leg long, try not to have it too elevated. And then I'm going to reach the top arm long and then just exhale and see if I can connect elbow to knee there. If that's pretty easy, then what we'll do is take the bottom arm and try to connect it to the top knee. All right, and then always going back into a sense of a reaching. So one of the things we can focus on is this front of the pelvis here. We don't want it to open up. We want it to really close down. So as we're making this connection, elbow to knee, you almost want to feel like you're falling forward slightly, but keeping this foot a little bit above this knee. All right, so that promotes a little bit more internal rotation at the hip. And then we want to be trying to make the contact or the connection right around the middle of the abdomen, or like right where the sternum meets the abdomen. So inhale overhead, make that connection. This should be one of the easier positions to find, but a lot of times the compensation is to open up, let this hip kick back so that the front of the pelvis is sort of rolling out. So we just want to make sure we're cueing ourselves or cueing patients to keep this compressed down as we make that contact, and then you can return to resting the head on the arm with this arm reaching long, this leg reaching long. All right, once we assess sidelying, if we can do that, then we can look at a quadruped position. So with quadruped, we have two hands down, two knees down. We're looking to reach the arms long. The wrist should be right under the shoulders, knees pretty much right under the hips. So once we have this position set in stone, we're going to reach the opposite arm and leg away from each other. And now the cross connection comes right under the sternum, or where the sternum and the abdomen meet. We're trying to make that contact elbow to knee cap, not elbow to thigh. All right, this arm should stay as is. So the common compensation that you'll see is to drop this shoulder and turn. This elbow starts to bend, and the shoulder moves behind the wrist. So you want to keep the arm right over and create this elongation of the arm while you make contact. All right, and then we can try that on both sides. There's going to be differences side to side, so you definitely want to test both sides there. If that feels easy, then we can move to looking at an elevated plank. So the elevated plank, the hands are elevated. We want to make sure that we're more towards the tips of the toes, not back here. Keeping the shoulder right over the wrist. Then we're going to try a same side connection first. Exhale, try to touch the knee above the elbow. If that's pretty easy to do, then what we can do is reach the knee through the arms. If that feels pretty easy, like we're bringing the knee through 2 goalposts, then we'll go to our cross connection, which is exhale, reach across. Again, trying to touch the knee to the elbow, not too low on the arm. If we can even get above the elbow, that demonstrates that we have a better ability to kind of bring these ribs towards this opposite side pelvis. All right, if we can do that, then we would just take this to the ground and go through a similar progression, same side, through, and then cross. All right, and the abdominals will start to work more the more that we progress the position, the more challenging the position is. The intention, though, is not to really make the abdominals work that hard. It's to be able to make the connection with harder positions. And that is an important distinction because it's easy to make your muscles tense up, but here the idea is to create more motion through harder positions. So that demonstrates that we have more control of range of motion with harder things. So we don't want to strain when we don't need to strain. We want to make this as easy to make the connection as possible. When we breathe out, we want to feel like we're moving these ribs closer to this pelvis. So don't make the position harder than you can just because you feel like you're trying to get a workout. That's not really the intention here. All right. Once we get the prone positions down, then we can start working on some standing stuff. And it's important to note that this isn't necessarily a linear progression of movements. It's just having sort of a continuum of positions that you go through and you assess and make sure that you can cross-connect in as many as possible. And if where you can't, you want to understand how you can work on that and improve that. All right, so planking may be the hardest position to work on for most people, but we want to understand how to do it in standing. We want to understand how to do it in side lying, etc. So we'll look at standing using a pillar here. So the pillar just gives us some reference for where our posture is. And we're going to start with a slightly knee bent position just so we can have the back of the belt line, the space between the shoulder blades or the mid-back area and the back of the head all on this pillar. And then what we want to try to do is create a sense of connecting while maintaining those pillars of support. So it's good to start with the feet together here just so everything is pretty central while we're lifting up. Now, one of the limitations here often becomes balance. So we have to make sure that we can feel balanced enough to even try this exercise. All right, but it becomes pretty challenging here. Having the head in contact with a pillar is very useful because just doing this and standing here and making this contact, the compensation is going to be to bring the head closer to the knee, but really what we're trying to do again is bring these ribs closer to this pelvis. So we don't want that head to come here and bias that. We just want to kind of isolate the motion more to what's going on in the abdomen. So having the head stay there and still being able to make that contact gives us a better assessment of what's going on there. So side to side or same side is always easier, and we can always start there, and then crossing, finding a limit, hitting a barrier, adding an exhale, reaching the standing limb into the ground can give us a little bit more motion, and I'm more restricted here, but we can get a little bit more activity. We're trying to pull in so we can make more contact, and we should feel that we're really using the obliques to get that little bit of extra. All right, the last little area that I like to look at is supine, and again, maybe we go to supine before we go to standing. Really depends on the person. If we're really tight on the backside, though, supine might be one of the more difficult positions to make a cross connection because gravity is opening the body, and anytime we try to cross the body here, we're going to have so much abdominal tension that it might get in the way. But the progression here would be starting hook lying with the feet or the knees bent and feet planted on the ground. Arms reach overhead. We're going to exhale, try to cross body here. While we're connecting, we're reaching the opposite arm overhead, and we're keeping this foot planted so that knee doesn't kick out or our body doesn't turn. Okay, and then we can just do a couple reps on this side and then assess the other side. One side's usually going to be a little tighter. Then we can just progress to legs straight. One side stays down, other side compresses. Looking at where we're restricted. So I'm much tighter here. So I'd want to stop, breathe out, try to make the contact while keeping my head down. But for me, that's a good assessment to say, okay, I want to work on that. I want to maybe free up some of the specific joint actions that would be involved in that, and then use that as an assessment over time. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, please go to movementprofessional.com. I'd be happy to get back to you.